Transmite para usted Radio Anáhuac Querétaro, transmitiendo desde el Centro de Medios de la Universidad Anáhuac Querétaro, ubicada en Circuito Universidades número 1, El Marqués Querétaro, una estación de la Escuela de Comunicación y Dirección de Empresas de Entretenimiento de la Universidad Anáhuac Querétaro.
Radio Anáhuac Querétaro, amplía tus sentidos. Welcome to the Arcade, your favorite show in gaming, with your host, David Torres. Sit back and enjoy the show. All your favorite games are here at the Arcade. Let's play. Hello everybody, it's me, David Torres, and welcome to another episode of The Arcade here in Radio Anáhuac Querétaro. I am so excited to be back. First time ever in this show having two shows, like 1 week after the other. I hope that becomes a norm soon enough. I'm very happy to be here today. I am very excited to talk about the topic of today's episode, because we're talking about one of my favorite video game genres today. We are going to be talking about RPGs. And yeah, well, without much of a further ado, you know how this goes here. We go through the topic, we break it down, we talk about the real aspect of it, we talk about the artistic aspect of it, and then we look at the news for the week. So we have quite a great episode ahead of us today, and I'm very excited to get into it. So let's start off with section 1, Insert Coin. Ready to play? Insert Coin. Okay, so in Insert Coin, we are going to be talking about RPGs from a more general aspect. What are RPGs to begin with? Well, RPG stands for role-playing game, and basically these games, well, it has kind of become a little bit of a misnomer in the industry nowadays. At its root, at its base meaning, a role-playing game is a game where you take the role of the character that you're playing. And, well, you might think, well, what is so special about that? Because realistically, we kind of take the role of the character that we're playing in any game. If you're, like, playing a Mario game, you're playing the role of Mario in that universe. And is Mario... is the Mario franchise usually a role-playing game? No. And yet, so what does it actually mean to be a role-playing game? Well, this is actually something that I found that was actually very interesting to me while I was doing research for this episode. There's actually a lot of controversy about what is actually considered a role-playing game. But if we look at the origins of the genre in and of itself, it actually dates back, like, the genre in and of itself dates back to Dungeons and Dragons. It's actually taken a lot of inspiration, like, the genre takes a lot of inspiration from the way that people play Dungeons and Dragons. And for anyone who has not descended to the levels of nerdiness that I have, Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, it is basically the quintessential nerd game. It's basically a game where you create your own character, you decide everything about that character, and then you basically get into a story where you can, well, basically it has an outline, usually, but at the end of the day, your decisions end up changing the outcome of that story. And from a gameplay perspective, there's stats that you have to, that you level up through experience points. Hey, experience points, hello. Yeah, it's an RPG term, mostly. And yeah, so basically through leveling up, through doing specific things, you gain experience and your stats become better and you're able to do more things. At its core, that is basically the essence of what an RPG game is. A sort of replica, in a way, of that Dungeons and Dragons format. However, obviously, not every game is going to be Dungeons and Dragons, because if it were, that would just be kind of lame. The RPG genre has really evolved to be a lot more complicated and a lot more diverse in what it allows. And it's actually something very interesting that I found throughout my research for this episode. There are a lot of people that are kind of RPG purists, where they're like, oh no, if it doesn't match this, this, and this, like, even past some RPG aspects, like, it's not an RPG. And I actually ended up coming across a person that said something that it really resonated with me. RPGs shouldn't necessarily be seen as a black and white, oh, if it doesn't have X and Y, it's not an RPG, but rather as a spectrum, where, like, there are some RPGs that are, like, very intensely, very fully RPGs, and there are some other games that are just partly RPGs, or that just have some like RPG elements within their gameplay without necessarily being like super RPG. So, basically at its core too, like RPGs, like some of the various like aspects that make RPGs what they are, or what people would usually look at and be like, hey, that's an RPG. Obviously, as I mentioned, there's like the whole stat situation where you can, put different points into different stats and level them up that way. Obviously, there's the whole experience system where you level up, and your character becomes more powerful with every level up. There's also things like skill trees, where after collecting certain amounts of a different kind of experience, you basically unlock new abilities. Something that is also kind of really interesting to me about RPGs is that they're often turn-based when it comes to combat. So it's like you have to pick an action on your turn, and then your enemy gets to pick an action, and back and forth, rather than real-time combat most of the time. There are some RPGs that do have real-time combat, but usually when people think of an RPG, they think of that turn-based stuff. And it's actually really cool too, because RPGs, like, one of the things that I really love about them personally is that they usually allow for really cool strategies. Because of that same thing of you get to pick how you build your own character, and you get to pick, usually, how you interact with the game. You basically are able to, like, try a lot of different strategies and a lot of different combinations to see what really works for you. So that is another part that is, like, very key to RPGs. At the end of the day, maybe you might play as the same character. For example, the Paper Mario RPGs, and really I'm just talking about the first two, because after the first two, that series became a little bit of a shame, I will say. But talking about, like, for example, the first two, it is Mario at the end of the day, and it is the same character, but it has certain features where you can pick when you level up, if you're going to boost a certain stat, or if you have certain badges, you can, like, activate certain different abilities. So that is kind of like something that's interesting with RPGs, that even if it's maybe the same character at the end of the day, you still have a lot of, like, liberty to pick what exactly you're going to do with your character. And maybe your version of that character is going to be different than some other person's version of that character. And that is something that I just really enjoy about RPGs. They usually have a lot of room for replayability, and have a lot of room for trying out new things and trying to experience the game in a bunch of different ways. Before we finish off with this section, I just kind of want to mention some of my favorite RPGs, or some RPGs that are notorious. For example, like, I was thinking too, like, something like Stardew Valley, for example, where it's basically generally the same situation, the same story. It does have, like, a lot of RPG aspects, in, like, the sense of, like, the level up and the experience, and that you are able to, like, really customize what you're going to be doing. But then there's also a lot more intense RPGs, and that are a lot more thoroughly RPGs, kind of like going into the Fallout series, where it might not necessarily be, like, everybody's first thought of an RPG, because I think a lot of people consider RPGs to be a lot more about fantasy. Um, but really, like the Fallout series is like RPGs through and through. Especially like considering, and this is like a very common comparison, Fallout New Vegas, that released within a year of a very famous other RPG, which is Skyrim. And it's really interesting just seeing like how really the RPG format it allows itself to for literally any kind of universe, any kind of story, and it does allow you to play it however you want usually. So yeah, that is generally just some of my favorite things within RPGs. We are going to go off into our first song break of the episode. And this is a song for one of my favorite RPGs of all time. It's from Xenoblade Chronicles. I would talk about it today, and like I did consider going in depth about it today, but it falls more onto the category of JRPGs, which is basically just Japanese RPGs, and I do want to dedicate an episode to that. So at a later time, I will be talking about this game, but this song is just so good, and I figured I needed to play it today. So we are going to go off into our first song break. This is going to be You Will Know Our Names from Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, available on Switch. So we'll be listening to that, and we'll be right back. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. From the screen to the streets, virtual reality. And we are back here on the arcade here in Radio Nahuatl Querétaro. I am David Torres, your host, and today we are talking about RPGs. Moving on to virtual reality, we are going, for people who are new to the show, this is basically the part of the show where we talk about those video games that have had a lot more cultural impact than just simply being video games. And well, as far as RPG goes, I don't think that there's any single franchise that can be considered more impactful culturally as far as RPG goes than Pokemon. So today, that is the topic of the episode, or of virtual reality. Pokemon is definitely a very interesting series. I will say, there's a lot of things about it that I'm like, wow, that is impressive. Starting off with dropping some cool facts here, Pokemon is the single most profitable media franchise. It's basically since its conception in 1996, it has generated an estimated $105 billion. And it's actually really interesting because most of it comes from licensed merchandise. Just to put it into reference, licensed merchandise accounts for 81.1 billion of those dollars. Video games accounts only for 23.5 billion. Which, I mean, it's still nothing to sneeze at, but it is actually very interesting. And just to put it into, reference, the second most profitable media franchise is Hello Kitty. And that has only, since its conception in 1974, which basically Pokemon has existed for, about half the lifetime that Hello Kitty has. Hello Kitty has produced $84.5 billion. Compared to Pokemon's 105. So that's actually something that really kind of astounded me. I did know that Pokemon was the most profitable media franchise. I just didn't realize how much it would it had of an edge over its competition. And honestly though, it is not hard to see the charm in Pokemon. Pokemon Red and Blue, the first Pokemon games, were released in 1996, and ever since there, it has become one of the biggest crazes in media. When it first released, it kind of came it released first only in Japan, and then it released worldwide 2 years later in 1998. And it is actually really interesting to see, looking back at it, how it was one of those franchises that people just kind of did as a passion project to begin with. The idea for Pokemon came from its creator, Satoshi Tajiri, and basically, the idea came from his childhood, where, he would just enjoy catching bugs and enjoy, watching sometimes bugs, fight, because I'm pretty sure that there's, a Japanese kind, a kind of bug in Japan that, battles, so it kind of gave him the idea for the Pokemon series. And it's really interesting to think that when they first released Pokemon Gold and Silver, which were the two games in the series that followed Red and Blue, at the time they were thought that they were going to be the last games, and here we are more than 20 years later. And the Pokemon series is going strong. I mean, obviously still it has a $15 billion margin for or lead into being the most profitable media franchise in the world. And honestly, it is very interesting to see just how it started. It's at its core, the game series, which is ultimately the main form of media for the game, it is a very simple RPG. It is, I think I would describe it as probably the easiest and most accessible RPG that is truly an RPG. Again, as I was doing research for Insert Coin, I found a lot of people thinking Pokemon is not an RPG, but it is. I definitely stand by that. It gives you a lot of a lot of options and a lot of things to do, and the way that the Pokemon grow, like, it's very interesting. Like, it can be very complex as a game, but it can also be super simple. Like, it's very interesting to see how, just at regular play, it can be as easy as you grind out an area, you level up your Pokemon, and then, like, kill everything in one shot. But then there's, like, the other side of that coin. Pokemon, there is an esport element to it. There's the Pokemon World Championships that are held every year, and it's very interesting just to see the flip side of that, where it's like the Pokemon Championships can be so strategic and so complicated and so interesting and so clever. So really, it is one of those games where, like, it can be as simple or as complicated as it can be. Then, too, when we look at, like, the actual, like, Pokemon system and things that, that helped it become what it has become now, one thing that I do find that was actually, like, it's kind of a very clever marketing strategy, and I don't necessarily think that it would fly with a lot of games nowadays. Ever since its conception, Pokemon has always released two games at a time. And what I mean by that is basically they release the same game in two different versions. There's been Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, Ruby Sapphire, Diamond Pearl, Black and White, Sun and Moon, X and Y, I said those two out of order, and most recently Sword and Shield. And basically every single pair of games is essentially the same game with just different, like, slight differences between both of them. In, say, for example, in one game you get one legendary Pokemon at the end of the game, and in the other version you get the opposite. In one game you encounter certain creatures in certain routes, and in the other version you encounter different creatures in that same route. And basically what this helped it become was that when it first came out, it encouraged people a lot to trade and to have this big community aspect to it. Like, kids could trade with each other, they could battle with each other, and they would share a lot of their experience while playing Pokemon. Like, I can say when I first started, like, playing Pokemon, like, I would enjoy bringing my was it 2DS? It was 3DS at that point. Yeah, it was already 3DS. I came into the series a little bit late. But yeah, like, I would bring my 3DS everywhere when there were friends, and, like, we would trade and we would fight, and it would become, like, it was, like, a really fun way to connect with other people. And I think at the end of the day that it's kind of, like, the main value that the franchise pushes within its narrative, that sense of connection and that sense of having other friends and this community aspect to it. And obviously, too, like, Pokemon, it started off as a game series, but, like, if you might recall from when I mentioned where the money for the Pokemon franchise came from, 23,000, well, really, we can say percentage because it has 105 billion. Let's do percentages because I feel like that becomes a little bit more understandable. 23% of its, like, revenue comes from video games. Like, 77 comes from merchandise. And that is something that I find really, really interesting about Pokemon. At the end of the day, it's kind of crazy to think that at this point, there are over 898 different Pokemon. That's basically 898 different characters that basically all of them have stickers, plushies, t-shirts. There is a lot of merchandise that comes from this series, and I mean, it makes sense how it becomes, like, such a phenomenon. And then too, not only does it it doesn't stay just at video games and merchandise. It obviously has the anime, which a lot of people might be familiarized with. I can say that I personally, like, I was familiar with the anime well before I started playing the games. And then too, there's obviously the movies. Recently there was Detective Pikachu come out, which was fantastic. And even then, too, not every single game has been an RPG. There's obviously Pokemon Go that was, and still is, really like a pioneer within its field and within this type of game of, you know, augmented reality and walking and interacting with the real world. And yeah, it is a really, really interesting franchise. I think anybody can enjoy it, from its simple gameplay to its complicated potential to its just very nice creature design, and it really is one of those series that has a lot of charm. I am actually really excited because just this weekend there's a new entry in the games coming out. It's going to be Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which is basically going to be a remake of Diamond and Pearl, which came out like over 10 years ago at this point. So I am very excited to get to play that at some point. But for now, we're going to go off into our second music break, and I am going to leave you with Cynthia, the remix from Kumu. This is basically the theme of the champion in these games, so it has some gravitas. And Cynthia is considered by a lot of people to be one of the best champions in the series, so what better song to leave this time around than with her theme? So we're going to be going into that musical break. Let's enjoy this music, and we'll be right back here on the arcade. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Nahuac Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. the games that are more than just a game. Experience points. And we are back here on the arcade on Radio Nahuatl Querétaro. I am David Torres, your host, and today on the arcade we are talking about RPGs. Going into experience points, I am very, very, very excited about the topic of today's segment. This is easily one of those games that I can say that has definitely altered my perception of the world for the better, and it just makes me so happy to have this chance to talk about it. This is easily one of the most well-known RPGs on the internet as of like the last couple of years, and it is with very, very, very good reason. This game is none other than Undertale. Undertale, basically at its core, it's a story where you play as this fallen kid that has fallen into the underground, and basically the lore of this underground is that thousands of years ago there was a battle between humans and monsters, and the humans won and basically locked up all of the monsters in the underground and in this kind of prison for eternity. Then you play as this fallen kid who has falling into the underground, and basically everybody is trying to kill you. More than anything, because in order for the monsters to be able to break the seal and escape from the underground, they need 7 human souls, and they have 6, and with yours that would be the last one that they would need. So basically, yeah, everybody is trying to kill you, but it's not necessarily that simple. This game is so full of heart and so full of love and so full of passion when, like, in the way that it's made. It, at its heart, it's basically a kind of satire of what the RPG genre is. Because in this game, it really is one of those RPGs where it really just drives forward the concept of every decision that you make matters. Basically, this game is advertised as a game where you don't have to kill anybody. And it is true. The game has a very interesting gameplay system where, yes, you have the option to kill anything that you come across, just like in any RPG you would. But it also gives you the option to spare or have mercy on whoever you're fighting. And basically, it's actually really fun too, because when you spare people, it's not necessarily just as simple as pressing a button. Usually you have to play some sort of mini game or some sort of puzzle to figure out how to save or how to spare the character that you're coming across. And it's actually very interesting too, because the game remembers everything that you do. If you decide to kill a character, it will never come back, like within your playthrough. If you decide to spare a character, it is most likely to come back at some point, and you're going to be able to see them again at some point. And not only that, but like, it has this element where, much like what we talked about last episode with When the Darkness Comes, it messes up with your computer a little bit in very interesting ways. It basically remembers if you've played the game before, and there's some significant characters that will call you out on it, that will call you out on, hey, why are you putting us through this again? And it does kind of create that satire and that critique to like people who are like just trying to find everything in the game without necessarily enjoying it that much. Within that, obviously there are like a lot of ramifications to, like, for example, there's a character who, it's basically the big person who's trying to stop you if you're doing an evil route, so to speak, where he basically says he basically remembers every single time that you've died with him and that you've tried to play it over and over again. And like, it really just solidifies how much the game breaks the fourth wall, and that is something that I always love about a game. Now, when it comes to the gameplay and how you would interact with the story of Undertale, there are basically three distinct kinds of ending. Realistically, let's just simplify it to three because there's like subdivisions between each of those three. There is the neutral route, where you basically kill some things that you come across like you would in an RPG, but it's basically just, how it happens. Then there is a pacifist route, where you do not kill absolutely anything, you're just trying to spare everything, and you just go, like, trying to stay alive without killing anything, which is completely possible to do. You can beat bosses this way, and you can progress through the game like that. And then finally, there's the genocide route, where you basically go out of your way to kill everything that every single area has. And it is very interesting to see how the game reacts to every single one of those choices that you make. When you first play the game, you're generally going to go into a neutral route. That is usually like the most common route that people go to, be it that they don't necessarily think that it's important or to spare just random enemies that come across, or sometimes you might not necessarily be able to figure out how to spare something, or maybe just trying to play the game like you would play a normal RPG. And that route is very interesting because it's basically kind of like it still gives you a sense of guilt. The game really does guilt trip you about like when you kill anything, and so the neutral route, as much as it might kind of be the more natural route that people would go for, it's also not necessarily as satisfying as it could be. The pacifist route, on the other hand, it's basically like celebrating you. It's basically like, oh yeah, the savior has come, oh yeah, this is really fun. It's like the game really enjoys it, and it actually allows you to know a lot more about lore, and it gives you access to different special things within it. And then finally, the genocide route, it's just creepy. Like, it really just does a really good job of pushing forward this idea of you're kind of becoming the monster yourself. And especially too because like the genocide route, it's not just that you kill everything they come across, but when you activate a genocide route, it basically gives you in every area that you get to, it gives you like a counter of how many things are left, like just in general. And whenever you complete an area, so to speak, like the music just turns hollow and just turns empty. Whenever you go into a city, it's always going to be empty. It's gonna be deserted, and it really just goes to show how intense the genocide route can be. Ultimately, though, what I love the most about this game is that meaning and that philosophy behind Undertale. It obviously comes from a place of, like, it starts off, and within the context of the game, there is the monsters and there's the humans. There's the monsters that are, like, supposed to be the weird ones, the ugly ones, the mean ones, and then there's the humans, which were, like, the winners of the story. And it is really, really interesting how it drives forward the thought of sometimes a monster, or that the people who are considered a monster, as I like to internalize the message of this game. Sometimes those who are considered monsters are a lot more humans than those who are considered regular humans. And it has just such a powerful message, and I really, really recommend people enjoy this game. It is available on Steam for 109 pesos if you get it on the Mexican store, or $9.99 if you get it on the US store. And it is one of those, like, gamer rite of passages, I would say, that it is really, really, really worth a shot to, like, just give it a playthrough and enjoy it, because you're bound to get some good enjoyment out of it, I would say. Without any further ado, though, we have reached the conclusion of experience points for this week, so we're going to go off into a song. This is going to be Undertale, the song from Undertale, the game. And yeah, I figured I needed to bring an Undertale song, so what better way to represent this game's music than with the song that has the name of the game in it. So we are gonna go off into our music break, and we'll be right back with more video games here on the arcade. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Anáhuac Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. a new update just dropped. Patch notes. And we are back here on the arcade on Radio Nova Querétaro. I am David Torres, your host, and we have finally reached the last segment here in the arcade, Patch Notes, where we talk about the video game news for the week. Now, this week in news and video games did not make me particularly happy. Usually I have the ability to be like, oh hey, at least we have a good piece of news. No, this is just an unfortunate week, I am sorry to say. Starting off, and as per usual, because this company just keeps on giving. It really just does. Activision Blizzard just had a walkout of over 100 employees this week, demanding that the CEO steps down. This comes after a Wall Street Journal report where it was revealed that the CEO of Activision Blizzard, Bobby Kotick, knew about the situation of the sexual harassment that has been in the company for years. And the Activision Blizzard situation, I say this pretty much every episode because I guess I have to talk about it every episode, but it's just so unfortunate. Like, it sucks that things like these have gone on in the gaming industry for such a long time, and especially from companies like just, video game companies make us happy. Like, that's basically what they do, and it sucks when a company like this that produces like very widely known games, as I've mentioned in other episodes. This company is behind big names like Candy Crush, Call of Duty, and my personal favorite, Overwatch, and it just sucks to see it. Like, for one, like, having, like, yes, going through this, but it sucks that it had this situation to begin with, and it sucks that people had to tolerate this, like, toxic work environments for so long. And I don't know, like, last week we had the news of its stock dropping like almost 15%, and now we have this and this is actually the second walkout that has happened at Activision Blizzard this year, and I don't know. I will say I appreciate having this show because at least I am very well aware of the news. And hey, if Overwatch 2 ultimately gets canceled, it would break my heart, but I wouldn't be surprised. That is kind of what I'm coming to with the whole situation with this company at this point. And it sucks, but ultimately it's necessary. Like, ultimately, like, we do need to put the human value and the integrity of the people who had to tolerate these working conditions above anything else. And hey, if like some of us don't get to enjoy a game that we would have wanted to play, I think ultimately it's a small price to pay for like human dignity at the end of the day. I hope it doesn't come to that. I really do hope that like this company is able to reform and like come out of the situation being reformed and with more integrity and more more inclusivity, but time will tell. I know what I hope, but ultimately I just hope that people get treated with dignity at the end of the day. Moving on, this is actually a little bit of an important piece of information that, I would say this is even more of a PSA than anything, because there has actually been a report that video game consoles and smartphones will be experiencing shortages this holiday season. This comes, obviously, with the whole pandemic. There was a lot of supply chain issues that we are still going through. Obviously, there was like the blockages of the canal, and yeah, the supply chain has been suffering a lot of issues in the last couple of months, and this is especially affecting right now because there's a particular global chip shortage. So yeah, basically it's not like, at this point it's not even necessarily that it's just an issue of getting the consoles to people. It's an issue of getting the chips to the manufacturers who need to make the consoles and the phones. So what I will say is, basically, if you're planning on purchasing a gaming console or a smartphone or some sort of gadget for this holiday season, now is the time, because if you wait until December, you are unlikely to be able to get it. Here's hoping that it's not necessarily going to be the case, and like, for example, especially if you're looking, like I can say in my case, I'm looking to get a new phone in December. Like, I'm trying to look at the possibilities of that. I would go for like an iPhone 12, not an iPhone 13. And the report is specifically mentions the newer models of everything. So here's hoping that if you're looking for something a little bit older, like, you're basically, I think at that point you're just like competing with just the remaining stock that like whatever store you're trying to go to has. But yes, here's hoping that this whole situation does end up getting fixed soon, and, well, you've been warned. Try to get your devices as soon as possible this year, and granted, it's just good practice to to do your shopping ahead of time, you know, because the holiday season just kind of gets crazy when shopping. So yeah, you've been warned. I'll put it that way. Moving on to another piece of news. This is probably like the least sad, but it's still sad. I don't like having sad news in this show, but I guess this was just one of those weeks in the gaming industry. As of yesterday, the Xbox Game Pass has lost 6 games. Well, basically the Game Pass is this like game streaming quote-unquote service where you basically pay a fee each month and you get access to a bunch of different games from the Microsoft collection. And despite what its name might imply, you don't actually need to have an Xbox to be able to use the Game Pass. You can get it on your PC and you can get a bunch of games that way. I personally have enjoyed it in the past. It's not necessarily one of those things that I pay for every single month, more than anything because like there are just months like this where we have finals coming up and I just don't have time for anything, much less I'll play games. So like I just kind of cancel my subscription every now and then. And but yeah, basically it's a subscription system where you get a bunch of games. None of the games in this list, within the 6 that were lost, necessarily call out to me that much, except for 2, which one of them is Planet Coaster Console Edition, which is basically a game where you make a theme park. And funnily enough, we might be talking about that game next week. Wink, wink. And the other one is Final Fantasy VIII Remastered, which I've always wanted to play Final Fantasy. I've never had the opportunity to play Final Fantasy, and well, it sucks to see it getting removed out of a place where I would have that chance to play it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately though, the Game Pass, it just keeps getting new games. Like, as in with any streaming service ever, like, you know, Netflix loses some shows and some movies and then gets some new ones. It makes sense. That's just how the streaming world works, and it makes sense that it would happen with Xbox. At least not all of them are that important, or that I had even heard of before looking at them in this list. But, well, yeah. Anyway, though, with that note, we have reached the conclusion for today's episode. I hope that you had a great time here talking about RPGs and just looking at some of the depressing news of this week. Here's hoping that next week we have a lot of very happy news, and yeah. So I hope that you guys had a fantastic time. I hope they have a great week, and I hope that you see me next week here on the arcade. I am David Torres, your host. Thanks to Jose Pablo, our producer / operator. And, well, that's going to be it for today. It's still daytime, David. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys. We might have run out of lives for today, but in the arcade, the game is never over. For everything about gaming and what we love about it, join your host, David Torres, every Wednesday at 1:15 p.m. here on the arcade, where we have all of your favorite games. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos.